Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dignitaries, state representatives, experts, organizations, and media. Let me first welcome you personally on behalf of the Global Network for Rights and Development for your honorable attendance, which is crucial in addressing the topic of the conference, which I would reword into how to fight terrorism within the means of civilized measures. Almost 2 years ago, GNRD working groups began researching the evolving nature of terrorism that forms the root of many human rights violations, either directly or indirectly. To investigate further, we deployed a number of field researchers around the world. We analyzed the results from every country in the world with the assistance of competent international organizations. I will be precise and succinct in order to preserve your valuable time, and I will try as much as possible to speak the language of numbers and percentages as well as proposals and solutions. I regret to state that terrorism is evolving and growing in proportions that threaten international peace and security. During the past 2 years, the world has witnessed 62,312 terrorist incidents and 618,151 terrorist incidents during the past 15 years. During the past 2 years alone, the media, whether local, regional, or international, has dealt with 39.5% of terrorist incidents, which means that there are many unidentified victims. 5 years ago, the victims of terrorism were confined to 8 countries, but today they are distributed to 151 countries. The blacklists of countries and international groups that practice terrorism vary and differ. To this day, there are 1,812 organizations listed by states on charges of terrorism. More than 13 million people work directly under their banner, and around 80 million people are influenced by their ideas. 23% of the world's youth are exposed to the danger of engaging in acts of violence and terror as the product of frustration, poverty, and the search for self-motivation. 33% of the world's youth are also vulnerable to reacting violently to terrorist practices using racial, religious, ethnic, and nationalist rationales. The direct economic losses resulting from terrorist acts have reached $5 trillion. This figure is itself enough to solve the problem of unemployment in all countries of the world by 65%. 10 years ago, the geographical area controlled by the terrorists worldwide did not exceed 30,000 square kilometers. Today, however, terrorists are in full control of approximately 12.5 million square kilometers of the world. The indirect control extends to about 66 million square kilometers. These are places where there is recruitment activity or sleeper cells. In the past 2 years alone, the death toll from terrorist acts stand at 632,716 people, while the number of injuries stand at 1,763,802. The number of displaced people and refugees has increased to more than 18 million people around the world because of terrorist acts. Before the year 2001, 80% of terrorist attacks around the world involved the use of primitive weapons and explosives. But later, sophisticated weapons, high-impact explosive, high-level technology, and unconventional methods were used in 72% of terrorist attacks. We talk about the direct economic losses and have not discussed the budget in the fight against terrorism. Can you imagine that the countries of the world combined spent $22 trillion to combat terrorism in just 3 years? Further, to this day, there are 12.5 million women living under the direct control of terrorist groups, which practice all kinds of oppression and brutality against them. There are 17 million children whose rights are violated on a daily basis and who are unable to intervene. There is also a serious development in the relationship between international criminal networks, drug trafficking, and terrorism. There are also daily executions unknown to us, women and children subject to rape, laws imposed that are incomprehensible in modern times, and unimaginable brutality. 20% of the world's natural resources, such as natural gas, oil, and raw materials, have been disrupted because of terrorism. 80% of terrorist groups in the world came from legitimate groups carrying false ideas, which they later defected from, making the international community face the greatest danger in fighting terrorism. Military means have limited the ability of terrorists by 7%, political solutions by 43%, and security solutions by 21%. 61% of terrorism capacities remain intractable to treatment. However, the greatest danger is its independence and ability to renew itself and to access the accumulation of terrorist experiences which are flexible in the face of routine government methods. 75% of the countries in the world have faced burdens on their public budgets as a result of problems related to the indirect effects of terrorism, such as refugees, security issues, and border control. 6,850 desperate areas in the world contain thousands of desperate people which are outside of government attention, and these have become the focus of terrorist groups. More than 28% of these areas have, within a few months, become incubator environments for terrorism, while the remaining regions have been exposed to the same risk. Terrorist thinking has evolved toward increasingly violent methods, and brainwashing techniques have evolved based on developed programs. More than 70% of those involved in terrorist acts do not feel remorse for their actions simply because they live in their own small world. There are those who are trying to isolate themselves further from the world too. A lot of terrorism ideas turn into values others believe in light of frustration and despair. The world has seen financial crisis, and although their causes have been looked at in depth, their close ties to terrorism have failed to be investigated thoroughly enough. 71 countries witness conflicts and civil unrest, weakening social cohesion as a result of the breakdown of governance institutions, because terrorism protection and prevention programs were reduced by 33%. Efforts were replaced with reactionary and direct confrontation methods. Because of terrorist activities, world food security became weaker, and food prices have been reduced by 23% as a result of increased risks in logistic routes. Another reason for this is that the sources of food, farms, have increasingly been consumed by conflict zones. Because of terrorism, macroeconomic plans of 42 countries have crumbled as 13% of their gross domestic product that was originally spent on welfare security has been transferred to fighting terrorism. Because of terrorism, 83 countries experience great difficulty in securing basic services which affected millions of people. Because of terrorism, employment programs in the world have been reduced by 21%. 45% of all states' efforts are dedicated to disaster relief and crisis management as a result of logistical difficulties from terrorism. Because of terrorism, 55% of the world's minorities face discrimination and displacement. Because of terrorism, reform programs targeting anti-discrimination have been affected by counter-terrorism programs, and, as a result, states have legislated laws opposing its founding principles. Because of terrorism, crisis recovery programs have declined by 26%. Because of terrorism and the resultant high death toll, lack of funds, and increased threats to workers' lives, many governmental and non-governmental organizations have stopped offering their help. Because of terrorism, crime in the world has increased by 12% as a result of decreased governmental control. Only 25% of the world's inhabitants now feel safe and secure. 24% of conflict zones are outside the reach of international relief efforts or organizations. Because of terrorism, confidence in institutional justice has been reduced by 18% as a result of extremist perspectives of righteousness, which, when acted upon, produce gruesome punishment methods under the banner of the rule of law. Because of terrorism, human growth rates have declined by 9%. Because of terrorism, and because of the fear of terrorism, many have changed their plans for stable families as a result of increased social inequalities, especially as gang-related influence has increased in areas beside terrorist-held areas such as refugee camps. Because of terrorism, 33% of displaced women were forced directly or indirectly to work in prostitution or illegal activities linked to criminal networks. Security precautions caused 36% of states to implement laws restricting economic activity in order for social security, producing complications in the fields of cooperation, trade, education, tourism, and broader culture. There are over 150,000 children around the world who have been subject to recruitment and forced to take up arms in order to kill and to torture. That is in addition to the 5.3 million children suffering from psychological traumas and the 700,000 children who are now outside the traditional family system. We have seen anti-terrorist groups resort to self-protection using illegal methods. The result is that more than 21% of these children have grown to execute methods of protection closer to terrorist activities. Because of terrorism, poverty has increased by 26%. The ability to exploit national wealth and resources has decreased by 37%. 29% of education has been affected negatively. Because of terrorism, entire welfare systems collapsed in 13 countries, and the minimum welfare security has decreased. 83 countries were forced to develop social programs. Because of terrorism, risk prevention methods by relevant international institutions have decreased by 13%. Because of terrorism, the protection of universal values has been damaged directly or indirectly as illegal immigration has increased by 31%, producing new ethnic minority groups. Today, there are 270 million people living outside their original country, and 46 million of them have immigrated as a result of terrorism.
We are currently working on the preparation of large and complex international reports on the side effects of terrorism and its direct influence on the collapse of values, high-caliber professionals, business people, scientists and academics who migrate from their original countries, collapse of social welfare systems and changing expenditure of budgets, crisis of the working class as businesses and industry close down, youth engagement in terrorism, planning or migrating youth to join terrorist groups, women's exclusion and exploitation, the extent of involvement of children in inhumane practices, terrorism becoming an outlet to express needs and aspirations of young people rooted in failures and injustice, countering the roots of terrorism recruitment, as well as a loss of confidence and sense of humiliation in the long term. Reasons for fleeing from circumstances surrounding communities affected by terrorists and drug addiction, lack of leisure facilities and employment opportunities, as well as the weakness of the elements of governance, justice, and finally, illegal confiscation of property, loss of identity in many societal sectors, rape and insecure livelihood, result of inaction towards addressing root causes of weak states, which has severe consequences on security, stability, and prosperity at the national, regional, and international level. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dignitaries, state representatives, experts, organizations, and media, all of the above proves that we are facing a plague named terrorism, which is spreading. Therefore, robust methods of treatments should be followed to counter terrorism. We do not believe that anyone in the audience or observers disagree with us on the fact that it is time for a collective response to terrorism. We need to expand the scope of responsibility and collective action to combat terrorism, together with the involvement of new sectors of intellectuals, writers, artists, and civil society and other parties in the face of terrorism. There is a gridlock in collective action. There are repercussions and risks which evolve day after day. There are no concerted actions. States' representation is not sufficient. States and international bodies are divided and dominated by confusion. The international community is not ready, nor has sufficient plans to face the sudden evolution of terrorism. We work with quick reactions. We focus on the responses that are considered satisfactory, and we tolerate the preventive measures and proactive actions. The existence of a safe world needs collective action, a specialized mechanism, consistency in the work of institutions, and a deep understanding of the national security of states. This has become inevitable to ensure the effectiveness of international cooperation. We need to encourage global citizenship, reap its rewards, and adopt more professional programs to renounce violence and hatred. We need to develop our civilization and to know that civilization is not based on the contempt of other civilizations, but to fight against all kinds of hostilities to ensure the diversity of human civilization and culture. We need effective institutions that are looking at the deep causes of terrorism and an international body that differentiates between prohibited terrorism and imposed terrorism. In light of recent acts of terrorism, nations and peoples have come together in calling the world's governments to act. We have a historic opportunity before us, full of possibilities for us to demonstrate that we are able to mobilize human capabilities to protect its components. Further, that we are able to combat terrorism while taking legal measures to maintain the achievements of human rights and development, and that we are resolute and united in stating that terrorism has no place in our world. In the face of terrorist practices and excessively violent behaviours, ideas, concepts and practices, we need to diversify the methods and means of confrontation. To this end, today we would like to present to you the first draft of a comprehensive international convention which warrants real study, as it is the result of an investigative efforts of experts who took into consideration the needs of the modern world. This convention addresses the following: general terms for collective cooperation to combat terrorism, how to develop international cooperation and coordination mechanisms to fight the root causes of terrorism, development of capacities of workers in this field, how to protect the human rights system whilst combating terrorism. Most importantly, the Convention has found comprehensive settlements to all points of conflict in the past. The birth of a new body, the International Council for Counter-Terrorism, which will ensure the following: safe, fast and enforceable legislation, a mechanism to review national procedures and to strengthen the capacity of national bodies permanently, presence of a permanent international operations room that works quickly to respond to new threats and coordinates between all intelligence services in the world, secrecy in procedures and development of capabilities, determining who the terrorist is and who the terrorist organizations are, and addressing these issue by issue based on the reports of countries subject to international collective opinion. This council will prevent conflicting procedures, reduce confusion, and unite international willpower in the face of terrorism. The council will not interfere or conflict with any international institution that exists, limit their powers, nor infringe on any national will, but rather it shall complement these. I hope that all of you will engage in our active debate and then take this debate to your countries and emphasize that we all, governments and civil society, stand united in the face of terrorism and in the defense of human values. Please remember that this convention is only the first draft, a significant idea which is a subject to further enrichment and development, stemming from your experiences and your efforts on this issue. I am sure that your presence here today is a serious step towards a comprehensive and quick solution that addresses the real causes of terrorism and practices of violence and extremism, so as to ensure the elimination of the phenomenon of terrorism whilst emphasizing the protection and respect of human rights for all. Thank you all, and I wish you good luck. And remember that the eyes of millions of vulnerable people around the world are counting on you and your distinguished work at this conference.